Kyle, you saw this, and KC Johnson, a longtime Bulls reporter in Chicago, had some info possibly on Zach LaVine.
Shout out to KC Johnson, always plugged in Chicago, now at NBC Sports over there. Had a mailbag. I think it was on Friday. I could check the date, but that would take some work I'm not willing to do right now. In any case, he wrote recently about Zach LaVine and the price tag it might take to get him. Here's what KC Johnson had to say. Quote, I do get the sense they, as in the Bulls, are open to more possibilities than before. More to the point, I've reported before what their asking price was. All-star level talent, first-round picks, or both. And my sense is that it has dropped significantly. So Derek, rightfully before the show, as we're talking through this, made the point that, well, what does significantly actually mean when the starting point is that high, right? Does it mean, hey, we'll just take picks? Does it mean they'll just take a high-level player, one-for-one swap, no add-ons, no nothing? I think in both those cases, if you're asking for multiple picks, if you're asking for a high-level guy just to get LaVine, I think that's a hard no.
I'm not giving you a high-level guy or multiple
I'm not
picks.
giving you a high-level, basically anything.
Well, first of all, they don't have high-level guys to trade. That's sort of one of the problems of this offseason.
I'm talking about picks, too. I wouldn't give, if I thought I had a really valuable pick, I'm not willing to give it up for Zach LaVine at this point because there are several factors that go into that. One, don't love the contract. He's making, $43 million this upcoming season, almost exactly 46 the season after that. And then he's got a player option 3 years down the road for a shade under $49 million. Those are big, big numbers for a younger player than the guys we're talking about, right? Paul George, Jimmy Butler, the guys on the free, not the free agent market. Free agent market in Paul George's case, trade market and Jimmy Butler's. I don't think he's as good as them. I think he's got his own health problems. So it's not like normally you'd say, hey, we're getting the younger guy. He's less of a health risk. Well, no, Zach LaVine has had constant issues. He's had major knee injuries. He's had nagging knee injuries. He's had nagging lower body injuries. The rest of a good chunk of his season this year was wiped out due to injury. Again. So you can't trust him as he's not someone you're bringing in at 29 years old and saying, well, you're confident he's going to play 70 plus games. And that gives you a solid Tyrese Maxey, Zach LaVine backcourt that when Joel Embiid is out, they're more than likely going to be able to hold down the fort for you. Where I do start to get interested is if Paul George stays in LA, Jimmy Butler and the Heat end up coming to some kind of understanding, and the options are thinning. And you can either, if you want to push chips in now or make a big move now, the choices are between you have to move real stuff to get Brandon Ingram, or they'll just give you Zach LaVine, and maybe you give up some extra on top of that to get Caruso along with him. That's when I think it becomes intriguing, because I think we've talked about Caruso quite a bit on this show. He brings a lot of value on his own. And somebody in the chat actually compared it to like a better version of taking Ben to get Mikal Bridges. Because Zach LaVine has flaws, but Zach LaVine I still think has utility and purpose as an NBA player, where I can't say that about Ben Simmons anymore. So if you can get Caruso and it's like, all right, Zach LaVine comes with, and you get two guys who are helpful contributors, even if one is very flawed and very expensive, that's when it gets into consideration for me. But I don't think Chicago is there yet. The problem.
And there's also two big differences there. One is that Ben Simmons is an expiring contract. Zach LaVine has 2 additional years on top of that. And the other is Mikal Bridges is better than Alex Caruso. Yes. So like that equation is completely different. Look, in terms of priorities, because Zach LaVine's next salary is only $6 million less than like Paul George would be. Obviously, I would rather go out there and give up, a max to Paul George and then 2 or 3 first-round picks, even if that's a drastic overpay for Caruso, rather than be tied.
And I think that might be what it takes.
In the separate deal, you mean?
Yeah. Rather than be tied to Zach LaVine's contract. Kyle brought up the injury concerns. There's that. There's the offensive fit concerns, although I think from a talent perspective, LaVine could fit if he's willing to slot into that role. Then there's the defensive concerns where, quite frankly, he just doesn't look like he cares all that much off ball the majority of the time. You add all of that in, and it's just a combination with the salary that I don't like. And he is talented. He could certainly, like, his off ball catch and shoot numbers weren't good this past year, but I think he's got that skill set in him for sure.
And he only played like 25 games, so that's.
I think he's got that skill set in there. I think he can move a little bit off ball. Obviously, he can create a little bit with the ball in his hands. He's got a lot of the offensive skill sets you would want, but the defense is really bad. The availability is bad. The buy-in, especially defensively, but including into his role on offense, is enough of a question mark where he would be nowhere near the top of my list. So the question becomes, if you get down to like option D or E or F, is he in that mix? I think that's where I get to the point where I'd rather go the role player route, depending on obviously the details there, or I'd rather go the balloon payment route and just wait for the next star, which I know Kyle does not like, but I would rather do that. Than this is almost the exact scenario where we were debating before. I would rather go that route than tie myself to a player and a contract that I don't want, just because you feel like you have to make a move now. I do have interest in Caruso, but I would rather overpay for Caruso on his own than I would, like I said, be tied to LaVine.
All right, so looking at it, and all right, so we talked a lot last week about the buy-in guys maybe buying low, as you said, buying low with the reporting there, and buying low on a guy that it has gotten to this point where they just want to get rid of him.
Yeah.
So they want to get rid of him with all the stuff that we just laid out there. Why could that not work? If he comes in here and he has the idea that he is going to be the second best player in front of Tyrese Maxey, he can forget it. That's just not happening. Now, the skill set, the all-star, all of that, guess what? What does he have, 1? So he has the same amount as...
2, I believe.
He has 2? So he does have 2. Well, he's only Tyrese Maxey's only 1 away from that, and we feel like he's on the trajectory of doing that. He's going to have to accept that. And then when we're talking about getting out of a toxic situation, which Chicago seemingly has been, them thinking they're much better than they actually are, for them to believe that they're going to go in once again this season and think that they're actually going to go in all in right now to win, they're nuts. And that's why they are in the position that they're currently in. But for him to get out of that situation, coming to a spot like this where it's a contending team once again, playing with Embiid and Maxey, oftentimes I feel like maybe I'm giving these guys a little bit too much credit of getting out of a bad situation and jumping into a solid one where you change your tune. He has never been a playoff player. He has never, from Minnesota to Chicago, they've been in the playoffs maybe once or twice, a play-in team, and that's all they have been. Yeah. You get out of that and you come into this spot. Will he buy into that with the 2 years left, hoping that with the option of him getting one more big contract left in that basketball body that he has, would he accept the role that he has to accept? Maybe make another all-star team as that third option, playing in a situation where he's playing with these 2 other guys. That is not what he's had in Chicago. So you just look at that, and then you point into the Caruso piece of it, and him being added into it. That's the icing on the cake of if you are able to get both of them. And that's what we're asking everybody. Of course, in the chat, we see some of the stuff you're throwing in there, especially the fun super chats, which we'll get to, that the whole piece of it, does it change because you do get that Caruso piece? Because look, when you're talking about paying Paul George, the Sixers want to win, and you pay Paul George, they give him that, they're clearly trying to win. If they do the other stuff, but those things could fall apart. And then you might have to act fast if those things don't happen, unless you go the route that Derek just laid out of, no, now I'm going role player. I'm just so out on Zach LaVine that I am going role player now, and I'm not giving him that kind of money. If it got to that point where we got to that F and E, F, G, H, and we get to that part of the conversation. We're going to sing the alphabet today? We can get there because that's where it seems like that's how far down he is. We have to sing to the alphabet, and then you say, stop. Okay, now I'll accept it. Then that's where it is. It's going to be a hard sell, I think, on a lot of Sixer fans. But there are a decent amount of Sixer fans who do like the player and just simply say, get the player in the situation and it's going to work.
Yeah, well, the skill set is there, so you understand why people would like the player. Yeah. It's just like, we've talked a lot about how it is difficult or more difficult now to build a third star sort of team because of the second apron, because of the more punitive repeater taxes, all that stuff. You do it for players who you think are worth it or who fit. When it's somebody who has so many question marks, it's just like you're going to tell me this guy is going to be paid $43 to $48 million and he's going to compromise your depth because you won't be able to sign anyone and still stay under the second apron. Those are the kind of contracts, like for me to give out a big contract, you either have to have a track record that gives me confidence, or you have to be able to slot into a role later on in your career that I think even if you're not being worth your salary, I can still at least trust that you will fill that role. And I'm just not sure when you mix in LaVine's warts along with his injury concerns, that's just the contract I would stay away from.
We all silly like the mayor.